All right, it's a good way to start a meeting. Okay, so for those of you who don't know me, my name is David Rayner. I work at Dewberry. Dewberry is one of a pretty large engineering firm here in the area, but they're actually a national firm. They do architecture, engineering, structural, civil. They're very large known in the civil side of things. My role with them is their mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and structural Revit application specialist. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. We've got 51 different offices, and I think I support about 250 different users, architecturally about the same. I don't do a whole lot outside the building, though. So I'm really interested in Donnie's presentation later, because a lot of times I have to help people bring the two together. Anyone here brand new to Revit? One? Couple of us, maybe? Okay, well, hopefully you'll all get a little bit out of what we have here. But really the intent was to put together a starter kit if you're working at a new firm or an existing firm that perhaps has a lot of AutoCAD background, and they're asking you to start the workflow in Revit. How do we get started? So this is what I call your starter kit. Now the first couple of slides here are kind of fun and to help get you prepped for what's coming. And if you've recognized this, I have a trivia question for you. The 6 stages of Revit. Wow, look what you can do with this. It's pretty exciting. It's fun. You can do all these 3D modeling and everything's live and it's fun. Well, then you get to stage 2 and it's like, well, this isn't how we used to do it. And wait a minute, how does that work? Then there's 3 things are going pretty good. Okay, well, then you'll get to the family editor stage where you're starting to build your parts and pieces. Now, just as a point of trivia, this has been out for a while. How old do you think this is? Don't look, I'm trying to block it. Any guesses?
7 years.
7 years. 12. 10. 14. 2003. So yes, it takes a while, but it's interesting how true this remains today. And it's been true to my experience learning Revit. So if you're just going on this journey, I want you to know that it's not a straight line from start to expert. It's got some bumps along the way. Okay? First thing that I start all of my training courses on is a topic that a lot of trainers put towards the end. However, does anyone here work for yourselves? Okay, we got one exception here. If you're not working by yourself, every project you work on is going to be work sharing, have work sharing enabled, or work sets, which means you need to know how to open your model without kicking everyone else out. If you don't open it in the correct order, nobody else gets to do their work. If you don't open it through the right method, you actually can mess up the model so the people currently working can't save their work, and you become the most popular kid in the block. So there's all of these yellow texts that you'll see. They are all links to more documentation. Like Jeff said, mine's a really quick, short presentation. The intent here is if you want this, email me. I'll have business cards up here later, but it's drayner@dewberry.com. Pretty easy to remember. All of these links will give you a lot more information. That's why I call it the starter kit presentation. And I guess I should explain what work sharing is. Once you enable work sharing, your file is going to live on a central server. All of your users are going to open a copy of that file on their local machines. That's where they're doing most of their work. Once they have finished doing whatever task they're up to, they're going to synchronize that data with the central model. And then the next user has to hit synchronize to see what their neighbor did. There's a lot more interaction going on behind the scenes so that 2 people don't edit the same element differently at the same time. It doesn't let you do that, but it's a pretty cool concept. There are some limits to how many people they recommend you enable, or how many people you have working in a work shared project at a time. Technically, Autodesk says there is no limit, that you could have 100 people in there. Physically, though, all these people are accessing the same point on a spindle drive somewhere back in your server, and that drive only goes so fast. So the physical limit I found is somewhere around 8 to 10 users you're going to start seeing some performance degradation. So work sharing, if you're new to Revit, it's a big part of it for a big firm. So make sure you get a good understanding of it. Next, you're going to have all these parts and pieces. We don't draw lines in Revit. It's kind of like blocks. You're going to use families. You got to learn how to use this family editor so you can make all your parts and pieces. As you learn how to make these parts and pieces, where are you going to keep them? What kind of a strategy are you going to use to keep your content organized? There's a couple of options on here. The first one that I like, especially on a smaller scale firm, maybe one office, is just put it in your project template. If you're going to start a new project, you want all your parts and pieces that you use regularly already in there. Because if you don't have it, what are you going to do? Well, you're going to go searching for it. Well, maybe you'll find the right one, maybe you won't. If you don't, then you're using the wrong content. At best, you find the right one, but how much time did you spend looking for it? Go ahead and have it in your project. It's already loaded and ready. And if you're using any type marks, well, now you can already pre-populate your type marks, so the first one you place is already numbering correctly. Yes, your template may end up being 50, 60 megs. That's okay. You're not losing anything because you were going to go get this piece anyway and put it in there, weren't you? You weren't going to not put it in there just to keep your file size down. It doesn't hurt you anywhere. The next option on here is to keep it all in a network structure somewhere on your server. Well, if you're going to keep it all loaded on a server somewhere, every year you're going to have to update your content because Revit is not backwards compatible. So if you have something that you've made that's the coolest family in version 18, but your project's in 17, you either have to start from scratch and build it all over again or not use it. So every year, you're going to have to keep at least 4 years back worth of content segmented out. Some other services here, Unify. They are a cloud-based content management platform. They keep up with all your versioning. They don't have any magic black hole tricks to make things backwards compatible. So the earliest version you put on there will be available for that version and every subsequent version. But they do a lot of management on that side. It's well worth the price. A couple other ones I wanted to recommend. We've got CTC BIM List, and Kiwi is a company out of Australia, I think. They make some pretty cool file management, family management programs. So we were talking a little bit about your project template. I mentioned go ahead and load all your families in there from the get-go. Think about your object styles, your view templates. If you're new to Revit, these are new terms to you. Well, before you draw a wall, your object style is telling Revit what a wall looks like, what the pin weight is, what the line type is. Go ahead and start presetting all of this to match your company standards for what you want it to look like. That way, the next layer to the onion that I like to tell people to start looking at is your view templates. Your view templates, they were introduced in Revit, what, around 2014?
They were
Perfected in 14, okay. They started prior to that. The idea of a view template is, here's all the settings I want my RCP view or my floor plan view or my annotation floor plan view to look like. This will set all of them. It's kind of locked so that if you go to your visibility graphics to change it, you can't. You have to change the template. If you change the template, you are changing every single view that is associated with that template. So now in one template, you can manage all of those views throughout your whole project. There's huge power in templates. The next bullet down here is cartoon your sheets. What I mean by that is go ahead and pretend you've got a 5-story building project. Go ahead and set up your views, your schedules. Go ahead and put those views and schedules on sheets. You're going to do that later anyway, so why not do them at the beginning? They're already in your template and laid out. You're not losing time, you're saving time, because next time you start drawing your building, it starts showing up on your sheets. Your schedules, you start drawing, putting your doors in there, your door schedule starts populating. So go ahead and front load it. And start developing a naming standard for everything. One of my pet peeves is when I go into the generic annotation category in Revit and everything is a mess. It's a hodgepodge all over. Can't find anything. I prefix all the families that we load in there as either annotation, a tag, or a symbol. That way, if I'm looking for a duct tag, I know where to find it. I go to my tags and there's my duct. Okay? So apply that concept to your line types, your, everything. All the things in Revit. Aaron Maller's blog. I'm a big proponent of following blogs and seeing what other professionals are doing and writing about. This is a link to his blog post from 2008, I think, or maybe sooner than that. Anyway, if I were to have printed it out, it's about 6 pages long of how to start from scratch with a brand new project template, all the steps you should go through to get to the end. It's a very involved. I hit a couple of those points, but really his is much more detailed, and I'd highly recommend you take a look at it. Okay. While we're on the subject of blogs, like I said, I want you to get a copy of this presentation. Any of these links you're welcome to. Hey, look, we might even know this guy in the back row there. These are a lot of blogs that I go to on a regular basis just to see what's going on, see what's new. You will find that even after you've been doing this for 7, 10 plus years, you still learn new tricks and new things every single day. So don't think you're going to get to where you know all of it. And then there's all the add-ins. There are add-ins across the gamut of things. Autodesk made a nice API, that's Automated Programmable Interface. You can learn to write these programs and add-ins yourself if you want. Some people have made some available for free. Some of these have a fee associated with them. These are all ones that I've used and highly recommend. Transfer Single, I'll go into that one for a minute. If you have 2 projects and you just want one view template out of this project loaded into yours, you don't want all 500 of them, you just want the one. Transfer Single allows you to dig down deeper into your project settings for what you're transferring, just one element at a time, not all of them. Maybe you just want 1 or 2 line types. It's much more granular for what you're transferring, not the whole project. Let's see, Rev'd has a couple of them. One of them is, let's say you've got a CAD detail that you've brought over and you want to convert all that text and line types into a Revit detail. The text on there is going to be a multi-line text that's been exploded, and it's like 20 lines. They've got one in there. You select all 20. You tell it, hey, make this one text object. Boom. It also has options for like your returns and periods and such. Rushforth is probably my favorite tool for going back and forth to Excel. Export, you can pick a Revit schedule, export that schedule to Excel, make the changes you want, import it back into Revit, boom. And there's also tools in there called the parameter transformer. You don't even have to take it to Excel. It'll manipulate it right there for you. So I highly recommend that one. I think that one's maybe $100 per user. You can get a network seat for like $4,000. Guardian is another one that you'll want to take a look at. Guardian is protecting your Revit models from getting all this stuff from the rest of the world loaded into it. If you are a smaller firm and you don't want to build all your content, you want to load it from vendors or manufacturers, they will protect you from getting all of their materials, all of their bogus shared parameters, stuff that really clutters and mucks up your model. They also help protect you for layers and line types that are imported from different details. So that's another one that's pretty awesome to see what they're doing with that. So again, get in touch with me if you want these. Oh, last 2 slides I've got. I'll try and cover them quick because I think I'm a little over on time. Groups, especially if you're in architecture and you're learning how to use groups, they're awesome and powerful. But if you don't follow the rules with groups, they will burn you bad. So yeah, just know that they have rules. If you start interacting with a wall that's maybe an exterior wall and it spans the entire skin of a 5-story building, but you can't include that in your group because then when you go to your next story up, well, now your exterior wall is going an extra story up and they've got embedded pieces. If you have anything that's wall hosted, that has to be, the wall itself has to be part of the group. All kinds of rules with groups. So be careful with groups. I think I've heard it said, friends don't let friends use groups. Huh? You use,
Yeah.
I love groups, but they keep burning me every time I use them. Yeah. And I think this is more rules for groups, but it didn't renumber. So come get me after the next presentation, and I'll give you my business card. And if you want, I'll email you the slideshow. So thank you. Without anything else, Donnie? Or yeah.
I think we're good. Yep.
Go.
All right. So we're gonna have another rodeo at this. If you've attended us at our tech tour yesterday, hopefully not. You didn't attend this session at the tech tour because it's the same exact thing. Nonetheless, so this is a match made in coordinates. This is actually a little bit of a preview of the session that myself and my colleague Purvi will be presenting out at Autodesk University next week, which if you find this presentation is something that's helpful, it is one of the 16 presentations that will be live streamed from Vegas next Tuesday as well. So if something that you think others might benefit from, be sure to share that with them. Nonetheless, is this, there we go, hello. So if we kind of sort of look into just what we're going to cover in this presentation, there's really three things I want to cover. The first is really just taking a look at the existing workflow and really exploring some of the gaps that we have here. And I come from a civil engineering background. Jason, of course, from an architectural background, so he'll be kind of representing Team Revit. I'll be representing Team Civil 3D. And really the sort of challenge that we're trying to bridge here is how can we coordinate these two worlds together? Civil survey does a really good job aligning all of their stuff. Architecture and all the various engineering trades for the building itself generally does a good job-ish, okay, coordinating all of their trades. But again, the building and the site usually don't get coordinated at all. So the first thing we want to share is just how we can do that in what I think is a relatively simple workflow. It's a little bit lengthy, it's a little nuanced, but we'll kind of take a look at that. Secondly, once we align these two worlds together, we can begin sharing information between them, which I think is really exciting. We can very easily share information from Revit into Civil 3D and Civil 3D information into Revit, and everything just lines up like it should. And then moreover from that, once we have these two worlds together, there's a tool that, again, if you're on the AEC collection, which many of our customers are now, you now have called InfraWorks. And this is a great, just kind of low barrier of entry visualization tool that will let me communicate my project really in the grand context of its surroundings. So we'll go ahead and touch on that as well. Again, this is me. I'm the technical product and online manager at CAD Microsystems. As I briefly mentioned, my background is in the civil world, so I'm one of our civil specialists, and I think most of you probably know Jason as well. He is one of our Revit nerds at CAD Microsystems.
The King Revit nerd.
The King Revit nerd. Ooh, got to get your crown. So if we take a look at the challenge, I already sort of alluded to this, but if I were to ask Jason what I need to do with my civil project, he would tell me, because the world revolves around the architect, or so he tells me, that I need to move my site to his building. And of course I say, whoa, 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 no, 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 that's not the way it is. My site is where it actually exists on Earth. You need to know what the heck you're doing and move your building to my site, because that's the way it's supposed to be. And really the only thing we can ever really agree on is to disagree in this particular context. So how do we bridge this divide? And the answer is, Jason can have what he needs for the purpose of design. I can have what I need for the purpose of my design with this workflow. So here's just an interesting little lunchtime discussion we had at the office not too long ago. This, of course, is the Burj Khalifa, world's tallest building, 2,700 feet or so. Now, I know this has sort of a pyramid shape to it, but my question to you is, imagine the Burj Khalifa was built straight up, and each of the corners were plumb. How much wider would the top floor be from the bottom? We normally think of plumb as being perfectly square. It's a rectangular shape. But if we think of it, because the Earth is round, and do we have any flat earthers? Okay, good. Since we have that settled, when we think of plumb, because the Earth is round, it's actually trapezoidal. And so, again, if the Burj Khalifa was plumb on all of its corners, it would actually be about 2 1/3 inches wider at the top floor than the bottom floor. And the reason for this, of course, is the fact that the world is round. It's a spheroid. And the other sort of inconvenient truth that we don't like to think about is that every single design document that you've created, that I've created, is a lie. Because we are projecting a building, a site, onto a sphere. But does anyone have sphere plans? All of our plans are flat. And so that's what I mean by every plan that we've created is a little bit of a lie. The good news is we all just sort of agree on what that lie is. Now, when we talk about the civil world, which I know I'm talking to a Revit audience today, the US, this is the lower 48, is divided up into what you'll hear your civil engineer refer to as state plane coordinates. The official name for this is the North America Datum of 1983. The interesting thing about this is the NAD 83 datum is actually based on the geometric center of Earth, which also has changed over the years as satellite technology has become more precise, and we are able to calculate the center of Earth in a more precise manner. That said, each state has at least one coordinate system. Several have multiple coordinate systems. And again, it's all about making sure that the lie of my plan, being 2D on a 3D surface, is within an acceptable margin of error. Now, Civil 3D understands this. This is the core piece of metadata that we put into a Civil 3D model. The challenge we have in making this workflow work is that Revit has absolutely no idea what a geographic coordinate system is. It can track all sorts of other metadata, but coordinate systems is not among them. So, how do we bridge this divide? The bad news is we can't out of the box. The good news is Autodesk has tools that are freely available. You just have to go and download them that make this workflow work. So the tools we're going to be taking a look at today, the core products are Revit, Civil 3D, InfraWorks, and Navisworks. But above and beyond that, there are a couple extra extensions that I need to download in order to make this workflow work. And they're freely available. The good news is, starting with the 2019 release, these are much easier to find. The big kind of critical one is the shared reference point tool. And before, even though there's a Revit version and a Civil 3D version, you had to know as a Revit user to go look in the Civil 3D productivity pack before 2019. But now it's all in the open. If you just go up to Autodesk account, you can find it. This is what's going to allow me to align my civil site with Revit and really kind of create that shared coordinate system. Above and beyond that, kind of to the second part of our workflow, which is to find a way that we can incorporate my civil data into Jason's Revit model, we're going to use Site Designer. We're not going to use all the design tools inside of that. We're just going to use one of the various import tools that we have there to more accurately get information from my civil model. And then to sort of aggregate the data and present it, we'll be using Navisworks and InfraWorks in this particular setup here. So first things first, I guess to sort of concede to the notion that the world revolves around the architect, Jason is going to get started in Revit for us.
I have control now. So of course, we're starting our design, we're starting building, we're opening a model, we're in Revit, we're starting our layout. We haven't really paid much attention to what the site looks like. I have a, the property line. That's kind of it. We're going to start our design, we're going to get things going.
to get things working. So the key to start understanding what's going on here are the terms survey point and project base point. So who has heard survey point, project base point as you're working inside of Revit? Who has seen your survey points and project base points inside of Revit? Who, like me, has to go and watch a 20-minute YouTube video every time I need to know which one do I move and do I unpin this one or is this one with a paper clip? It is pretty troublesome. It's not something you're doing every time. And to be perfectly frank, I am certainly not a survey point, project base point expert. But here's our little workflow, right? We go to view, we go to visibility graphics, we turn on those categories so we can see those two elements inside our review. The Revit project template out of the box does not have this turned on. So that's why one of the reasons we think that people kind of don't pay attention to it, because it was never in your face, you didn't see it. So every project template we build now, in the first floor working plan, we are sure that this category is on, so you see it, and it's where it is, and it's in your face. So turn it on, here they are, right-handed up in the upper corner. We want to get super nerdy. They look a little like the Deathly Hallows from Harry Potter, but you know, we can kind of go beyond that. This is going to loop a little bit, getting back there. As we kind of work through the workflow, we want to talk a little about creating a civil coordination view for export. I do want to circle back on the coordinate system real quick, though. Since this is a Revit user group, we're going to get a little more nerdy and Revit than we did in the presentation. You've got your project coordinate system, you've got your survey point coordinate system. There's also a third coordinate system inside your model, which most folks don't know about. It's called the internal point, or maybe the Revit internal origin system. So we actually have 3 0 0 zeros that Revit is paying attention to. And typically they are all in relation to the hidden one, which is the internal origin system. And I assume, well, I shouldn't assume, who has seen the originally 2-mile error, now it's gone up to the 20-mile error when you try to bring in the DWG. It says this is more than 20 miles away, something's going to get goofy. It is a really bizarre problem, kind of like the survey points themselves. There is there's an article that kind of explains why it happens, and I've read it about 6 or 7 times. And there's a lot of math in the article, so I just don't get it. So there's something about how the Revit database does its math and tracks things. So if you get something too far away, the fidelity of the line work breaks down. Just how it represents it, it just can't do it. Very, very well. So we want to make sure, at the very least, our project base points and our project geometry and our Revit internal origin are very, very close to each other. But as we work through this process, even though Donnie thinks we don't do it this way, we assume our survey point is our precision on the world. We will be moving the world to get it in the right. The world is going to move around our project. That's great. So we haven't done anything with our coordinates. We're leaving them where they are. They were right in the box. I'm just simply aware of them now. I know they're important. I know I want to do something with them. But what we want to do is just create a nice little view to export for Donnie. This is kind of Revit 101. I'm going to create a new view. I'm going to save my project. I like to kind of throw out things that we've learned over time. Like David mentioned, I mean, we are learning new things all the time as well. When I first started in Revit, it was, everybody said, more views in your model is going to make your model fatter. It's going to make your model fatter. It doesn't. More views in your model really does not make your model much larger. So we are creating a dedicated civil DWG export view, and we're just going to leave it in our project. As soon as I make it, the first thing I'm going to do is rename it. Always. Make a new view, rename the view. Make a new view, rename the view. I go into a project and I see section 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17. Those are where I delete first. They're gone. You don't care about naming your view. I don't care about your view either. So I've created my view, and next thing I'm going to do is come into visibility graphics in this view. David also mentioned view templates. View templates are an immense boost to your productivity inside of Revit. If you are not using them yet, start using them. This is kind of the traditional way of getting invisibility graphics, but I'm simply coming into my view and I'm starting to turn off everything that Donnie just does not care about. So I'm turning off everything except for my walls and my model categories. I'm going to turn off all my annotation. This is simply a footprint that he is going to use to position it on his site. So we go to annotation categories, we turn all of those off. We've already turned off all of our model categories. And then when we come back here, I'm going to hit OK, hit apply, hit OK. Got to get the timing of the videos probably a little better. We're working on it. But we're down to just walls at this point. Of course, this is still probably a little too much for him. He doesn't care about the interior walls. So the next step I want to do is I want to build myself a project filter. And then I want to create a view filter in this view associated with that project filter. So if filtering things by category, turning up my categories is not enough. View filters is another extremely powerful feature inside of Revit that you're not using. It can really speed up a lot of the steps. So I'm creating a filter. It looks inside of the data inside of my walls. Inside of your types in your walls, there's a function, there's interior, exterior, structural. I don't know if you have them, there's like 5. There's a couple. So I'm making a filter here. It's hard to see. It says function does not equal exterior. So I'm creating a collection of walls that are not my exterior walls. And then once this project filter is created, I can say apply and click OK. Then I can go back to my visibility graphics. And once I get back to my visibility graphics, I will create a view filter based on that project filter. And then I go to my filters tab. I go down to add, and I select the filter I just made. That wall is exterior only. I say OK. So that line says give me all my walls that are exterior, and then I uncheck the visibility box. And so every wall in this view only that is not exterior, as soon as I hit apply, they're going to be turned on. And this is pretty good. I mean, I have done very little effort. This is now saved in that view. Every time I do an update that Donnie needs, I can just re-export this guy. And that's kind of this next snapshot. I'm going to export my view as a DWG. I'm going to send it over. Now we've been talking about coordination of positions and getting things lined up. I've done absolutely nothing with my coordinates so far. Nothing at all. I don't care if this is exported by shared. I don't care if it's exported by project. Simply giving him a footprint to start putting things on the site. And then he's going to collect some data, get it back to me, and we're going to get things kind of lined up that way. The baton is yours.
The baton is mine. Excellent. So Jason's been really nice cleaning up that initial view to basically just the exterior walls, which as the civil engineer is really all I care about. Now, once I get that from Jason, I'm still going to do a little bit of cleanup because as the civil engineer, literally all I care about is the outermost footprint of the building. So this is, of course, the file that I got from Jason, exported out. It's still at 0.0. I'm just going to do some basic AutoCAD here, cleaning this up to create the overall footprint. And again, I don't know that we really care about seeing the cleanup here. This is just AutoCAD basics here. So again, just filleting things to create an outline of the building footprint. So it's with this building footprint that I can then begin really the design part of my particular project here. So as the civil engineer, it's my responsibility to locate things both horizontally and vertically. So in the civil world, we kind of design those separately. I know in the Revit world, both are kind of designed in tandem with one another. But as civil engineers, we kind of think both horizontally flat and then also vertically as two separate things here. So this is a video more for the full presentation, talking about analyzing the surface, figuring out what the finished floor elevation is going to be. But I'm not going to worry too much about that. What I am going to do, though, is go ahead and take that cleaned up footprint that Jason sent to me and import that into my project. And because I am such an awesome civil site designer, I have designed my entire parking lot without knowing where my building needs to go. Anyone else that good of a designer? You can kind of design it from the outside in or inside out. Anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and bring in that building footprint. The one thing that might be a little weird for your civil engineer, my sight line work in Civil 3D, we typically keep that at an elevation of 0. We design kind of on a flat plane. And the building footprint is usually among those things that is at an elevation of 0. However, when I go ahead and insert this, I'm going to go ahead and actually insert it at the real finished floor elevation. So I know that might seem a little abstract in Revit land, but in civil world, again, this footprint would usually be at an elevation of 0, but I am making sure to make it at my finished floor elevation, which I think is 190 in this particular case. But there's my building footprint. The big thing that I need to do now is share this or put it in a format that I can share it with Jason. And unfortunately, just sending this drawing file over to him isn't going to help him whatsoever. And this is where that shared reference point tool I was talking about comes into play. Okay, there's a extension for both Civil 3D and for Revit. And so the one in Civil 3D basically works, and again, I talk about making sure this tab is loaded here. But what I'm going to do, and we can probably fast forward to the point here. Here we go. So I'm going to go ahead and run this shared reference point tool. And it's going to first ask me for an origin point. So I'm going to go ahead and pick that corner of the building. As a civil engineer, I laugh at this prompt. It's asking me for the quasi-north, which no respectful civil engineer is going to work in quasi-north. But I guess that's an architectural term. What it's going to do here is pick up the absolute horizontal and vertical position here, X, Y, and Z. Your civil engineer will refer to X as easting, Y as northing, and of course Z as elevation. It's also going to pick up the rotation in the XY plane. It does default regardless of what you do to meters, so I do need to make sure that I switch this over to feet. And really all this is doing is acquiring the geographic position of this building, and it's going to save it out into an XML file. If after saving that XML file out, I just open this up in Notepad, this is what I'm going to see. You can see it's picked up an X, Y, and Z location here. Again, in civil engineer speak, we would call the Y coordinate northing, X easting, and then Z as the actual elevation. If you do get this file from your civil engineer, just make sure it says feet here, because chances are their project was in feet. If it says meters or something like that, just hack the XML file to say feet. But nonetheless, what I can do now is send this XML file back over to Jason, and he'll be able to import this into his model.
So just to kind of take a step back, Donnie and I spent a lot of time in the car with Billy. We did this presentation this morning as a room full of civil folks. So we decided we're going to keep the Revit stuff in that one. We're going to keep the civil stuff in this one. This is the Revit user group, but the idea for them is that, look, this stuff in Revit is easy. On the flip side, the idea for you guys to even work in Civil 3D, this is pretty easy. This is not a difficult workflow. So if you get pushback from your civil engineers that that's impossible, that's really hard, like, no, I watched that, it's not too difficult at all. So it's a single workflow we're working through a process. It'd be difficult to inject it into a current project, but certainly moving forward on new projects, it just is not a difficult procedure to go through. So stepping back in the presentation from there, Donnie has passed over the XML file. I need the XML file. I also need the two other pieces of information, where he clicked on that origin and where he did his quasi-north direction. So I need those 2 points, and I need the XML. And obviously those 2 points have to be something I can find inside of my Revit model as well. I'm going to then come in here. I've got the shared reference point tool installed. It was free. Go up to Addins. You see it says import shared coordinates from XML file. It is the world's ugliest add-in icon.
An engineer designed that. Thank you very much.
I click OK there. It's asking me to select origin point to align. That's that first point that Donnie clicked. So I zoom in, I click on the upper corner. It's asking me to select my Y position up. So I come over here, I click on the other point. So I've identified those 2 points, and once I do that, it's like, where's that XML file? I click on the XML file, open it up. It's going to ask me, do I want to create a new site location? And I say, OK. So far, nothing's happened. Nothing that looks like it's happened. If I go into my project settings, I'm going to go into my site. I have a new segment. The project can have multiple sites in there. And this is where we are starting to figure out and define that shared project, that survey point location. This is where we are moving the planet around our model. So I've selected the new one, I've made it current, and I say, OK. Again, nothing has changed. My project base point has not moved at all. So all of my work that was done here is absolutely fine. But I'm going to change my project north to true north, say apply. My view is already updated. I did nothing about rotating project my true north like the traditional way. This is looking exactly like Donnie had it laid out in the civil. And if I do my zoom extents, after I turn on my project point, my survey point again, just to have those show up, as I am doing right now. I'm not stalling for time. I keep talking here. Click OK. There's my project base point right there. My survey point is gone. Zoom out. It is way over there. So all of my project work is down here. My survey point is over here, simply by importing what Donnie sent. So this is his DWG coordinates. So we have established a shared coordinate system with just a couple of clicks. It is a shared coordinate system based on, what was it, the North American
datum of 1983.
North American datum of 1983. Thank goodness for the 80s. So what you've got to do, as long as
It's 11 million
keep
feet.
Geometry up here, and as long as you keep the graphics for the survey point off, you're fine. As long as nothing ends up over here, you just keep that category turned off. Revit does not care. We did some testing.
Okay.
So I can't promise, but the testing we did,
We tried to break it and we were unsuccessful.
it did not yell at us because all of my project is near my project base point, which is near my internal forge.
Right.
So that, I mean, everybody's probably seen this. You've probably known it's something bad. You have a PWG explode, you just delete it and all that stuff. This is what I want to do. I want to establish a shared origin that we can now share back and forth successfully. That all looks good. I think.
So what's the survey point in that? What is the coordinate here?
So if we went back to the XML file, you'll see the values there. This is up in Richmond, Virginia, with the NAD 83 State Plane South Foot civil engineer terminology. The most projects in the Richmond area, at least, are going to be in an 11 million, 3 million feet away from 0, which is just the absolute geographic position of that particular site. So yeah, that survey point is at the 0 basically of AutoCAD. It basically pushes the site out, or sorry, the building out to be at this 11 million, 3 million number there. And obviously this is where things start breaking down. If you were to kind of natively bring the civil model into a Revit project, it makes things blow up because 11 million is well more than 20 miles. A couple more, yeah. Just a few feet more.
So I've established a shared coordinates. I've got it in. I can now publish or require back and forth as long as all my models have that similar project location. They're all where they should be. This is kind of what the shared, the survey point is intended. It's kind of tough to figure out. It's definitely tough to do it manually, so that tool really speeds up the process and how things go.
I think this is me, yeah, we'll see. Oh, no,
You?
well, it's
You
you.
can click for me.
Yeah,
Click for me.
there you go.
All right, so we established the point. We want to give Donnie some three-dimensional geometry to kind of work with in his workflow. And then all we are going to do is export this now to Navisworks. We can send him the Revit file. We can export it as 3D EWG, but the Navisworks file is much more compressed. Its graphics are easy for AutoCAD to manage and deal with. He's not going to be doing design documentation off of this. This is more for reference. So I just come into the standard export to Navisworks. I do want to go to my Navisworks settings on export, and I want to change my origin. So by default, it's at the project base point, and make sure my coordinates are set up as shared as the definition of this. So again, now my Navisworks file that I'm exporting is going all the way down to 11 million.
11 million, 3 million, yep.
11 million, 3 million feet away. But it's all been defined. It is all on that same point, and everything is going to start lining up. So I export it, and it's just exporting Navisworks, and there's nothing really magical about exporting Navisworks. I give it to Donnie. I stick it on FTP site, or I email it, or I
Whatever, zip drive it, yeah, I mean,
however he wants that Navisworks.
yeah. You know, good old sneaker net, courier net, right? You saved it to the zip drive, you couriered it across town, right? That was blazing coordination back in the 90s and early 2000s, right? Absolutely. The one thing I will mention, just to tag onto this, Jason mentioned that he could have exported a 3D DWG. There's also another one that's lesser known. If you get a hold of a real civil nerd, they'll say, can you send me I think it's called a building site or something like that out of Revit. It'll write to an ADSK file. Don't use that format. It's going to blow up the civil 3D drawing. So if the civil engineer asks you for that, tell them they're an idiot and give them the Navisworks file.
Tell him Donnie told you.
So anyway, in our testing, we found, of course, Navisworks is one of the lighter weight or most lightweight formats. A lesser known thing for AutoCAD users is the fact that we can now bring in Navisworks models directly into AutoCAD. So that was a relatively new feature. I think it was introduced 2016-17 era. But the nice thing is, because Jason has set up the shared coordinates over in Revit land, and that survey point is 11 million, 3 million feet away from the building itself, I can just go ahead and attach this like any XREF that I would in my typical project workflow on the civil side, which again, I just X-reference the survey drawing into my site plan with a 0 coordinate for insertion point, no scale, no rotation, and it just drops into place just like this building here does. And again, that is perfectly where I positioned it, told Jason where it was, and he positioned it there. And since this is Navisworks, if I had done this with that ADSK format or a 3D DWG, AutoCAD would get really, really mad if I started orbiting like this. So this is why I really like Navisworks in this way. And I can see his building in the context of my design. Now, since Jason has been nice enough to position his building, I don't care if he says that he moved the earth or whatever it was, he made me happy. So I'd like to reciprocate and send him some of my civil data back. Now, being Revit users, I assume everyone is at least vaguely familiar with IFC. Is that a fair assumption? So IFC, of course, is the exchange format for BIM data or Revit data. On the civil side, even though IFC has started getting some sort of civil categories inside of it, it's not really something civil engineers know too much about. There's another format called Land XML. And pretty much any self-respecting civil application created in the last decade can at least export to Land XML. So this is true regardless if your civil engineer is using Civil 3D, if they're using Carlson, if they're still living in the 90s and using Land Desktop. We still have a couple of those clients. If they're using MicroStation, it doesn't matter really where their project is built in. They'll be able to export Land XML. And the way I like to describe Land XML is it's basically IFC for civil design. So when I come in here to Civil 3D, I can go to export it. I can export just about any of my sort of civil categories. In my case here, I'm going to take this drawing here and I'm going to deselect everything except for my surface in this case. And I'm only going to send Jason my surface. This is going to export it out as an XML file that, once again, I'll go ahead and zip drive or upload to BIM 360 or wherever the case might be, and send it over to Jason. Now, one thing I'll say about doing this workflow, you may already be taking the civil data and building a topo surface out of it, just like Jason's going to here in a moment. However, you're probably doing that with contours now. The issue with building surfaces from contours is it's kind of like Xeroxing a piece of paper. It looks pretty close to the original, but it's slightly off. It's not perfect, you know, it's not exactly precise to that original bit there. What I have done here with this Land XML file is I have shared the precise surface definition exactly the way it exists in my civil model. I have shared that with Jason in a format that he'll be able to bring into Revit.
And we're going to do that. So this is where we start using the Site Designer app. Who has installed the Site Designer? Who has used the Site Designer? Who likes the Site Designer? Okay, that usually builds things down. The first button in the tippy top in the upper corner is Import XML. And that's all we're talking about doing here. That is send me the surface. I want to bring in that for context, for design, to make sure things are lining up where they are. I'm going to bring it in and back up. This one's going a little faster than I want.
I will say, since I didn't include any alignments in that XML file, it doesn't matter if you unselect that alignment piece, but it's not a bad thing to do.
This is a recording, so I'm not doing it.
Yep.
So, go to import alignment XML. I go ahead and select the XML file. There are a couple checkboxes. We want to get our alignment, topo surfaces on and alignments off, even though Donnie says it doesn't matter. This is the one, again, we're paying attention to. Position. Decision by survey point. We have to find that origin. Donnie's origin, that's my survey point origin. That is where I'm in placement. So in theory, knock on wood, spoiler alert, it works because I watched the video. I'm going to bring it in. It's going to be exactly where I want it to be. So I go ahead and I start bringing it in. After hitting OK, it does some reading. It just does some generic Revit stuff. Do I want to make a new topo surface? What phase do I want that topo surface in? Do I want to delete any other topo surfaces it finds from that phase? it's trying to help me just clean up my model. I don't want 17 topos lying around. It just makes no sense. Bring it in, do some churning, and then in a second we'll have the beautiful topo services that we're generating for us in that pretty mud brown color as the font. And there it is. I brought it in, and it's pretty much where it should be, I expect. One of the tests we're going to do, if you remember early on, Donnie said that the first floor really pad was at 190 feet. So I'm going to do some spot elevations. I'm going to see if this thing is right around 190 feet. Spot elevations are based off of my survey, not my project base point. So when I start driving you in there, I will zoom in 1 second. We've got 189 11 inches. We've got 189 11 inches. And the third one I draw up here is going to be at 190 feet right at the top. So this is bringing in Z, it's bringing in X, bringing in Y, or it's bringing in northing
and easting, yeah.
and elevation properly as well.
But if I dropped a spot shot in my civil model at that precise location, it would read out at the exact same figure in Jason's Revit model as it does my civil file, versus if I had built, or if Jason had built the topo surface from contours that I sent him, there's a chance that that elevation label would not read exactly the same as my civil model did. So by using LandXML, you can rest assured that that is going to be the precise elevation that I'll report in my model too.
And that is all we use on the LandXML. It's like first button. Maybe someday we'll start using some more buttons. So I brought it in here. Everything is lined up properly. Then I am done.
You're done,
At
yeah.
this point, we've established shared coordinates. We all have a shared happy 000, and I can link in your stuff
Right.
by origin. And we're good to go.
So, you know, we've essentially solved the core conflict that we set out to solve. It's not to say that there aren't other conflicts, but we resolved one conflict, and this is good counseling. We've made progress. We've solved that core problem, which is the Revit model is in one sort of location, the civil model is in another location, and never do those two overlap. We have solved that core problem, I think, relatively easily. And by doing that, it's empowered me to be able to share information back and forth. So I can share information from civil to Revit, Revit to civil, and that's really the essence of my design here. Now, where we're going to step into now is more in the coordination, the communication of a project. Now, when we're presenting projects, it's great to be able to create a visualization of just that site, but to really make an impactful visualization, it really takes context. I want to know landmarks around my particular site, but getting those landmarks can be a real beast. So InfraWorks is a tool that if you have the AEC collection, you have this tool. And one of the really awesome features here is even if you know nothing about GIS, you know nothing about building these models and everything else, you can create an InfraWorks model as long as you know how to type in an address into Bing Maps. So that's precisely what I'm going to do here. Actually, I'm not even typing in an address. I'm typing in a point of interest, being the Science Museum of Virginia. I will go ahead and give it a name. And what this tool is going to do is go out and source road data from OpenStreetMaps, building data from OpenStreetMaps, imagery from Bing Maps, and elevation data, usually from USGS or USDA, some federal data source there. And all I do is I give it a name and I say create model. And I sit back and I wait for about 3 minutes, okay? And about 3 minutes later, I will get an email, or if I'm extra patient, it'll just pop up here inside of InfraWorks, that model. I can go ahead and click that, and it's going to go ahead and download this. And I should have sped up this part of the video, but if I fast forward here, it's downloading this. And with an investment of about 5 minutes, I have modeled pretty much the entire city of Richmond around my site. Pretty awesome. So because I have set the survey point from the survey or from the civil model, and Jason's building lines up with my site, we can start bringing in and aggregating all of this information here. So first things first, this is talking about just very quickly, because I did get this from a federal data source, it's very sort of macro. It's not super precise. So the actual elevation 190 there is not precise. So I can go ahead and actually take that same land XML file that we exported out from Civil 3D and bring that in here as well. I could also attach the Civil 3D drawing directly, and it would set that elevation appropriately there. But again, it's really simple just to bring this in. But here's the part that is maybe a little odd. So I'm going to import the Revit model, and when I come up here to import it, you might see there is Autodesk Revit there. Don't use it. The issue with InfraWorks, and I wish they would fix this, is that the Revit import is always going to read the model base point. It's not going to read the survey point, even though that it is set. So if you haven't set the survey point, you can use the Revit one. But what I recommend to do instead is to take that Navisworks export that we did, go ahead and open that up in Navisworks and just go straight to export to FBX. FBX is sort of a 3D exchange format. I can then bring that in as a 3D model. I'm going to classify it as a building here. And because Revit doesn't really understand coordinate systems, it doesn't keep that Virginia State Plane South NAD 83 datum sort of metadata in there. So I just have to know that. I can just go ahead and set that coordinate system right here, and it will blank everything else out. So just as long as I know what coordinate system the surveyor put things on, we can do this here. I'll say close and refresh, and assuming everything is correct, my building should appear exactly where I positioned it in Civil 3D, exactly where Jason set up the shared reference point inside of Revit, and there it is. I didn't have to do anything other than just tell it what coordinate system it was in. And that's only because Revit didn't carry that metadata along. Now, if I'd like to visualize this a little bit better, what I did is I went into Civil 3D, and I just created outlines, just polygons of my parking lot, my parking islands, that sort of thing. And I just exported them out to a GIS file format using some of the Map 3D functionality. And here, all I'm doing is importing that tool or importing that information. I'll assign materials to this. Here, I'm taking the actual site boundary and I'm bringing that in. So I'll go ahead and apply a material of grass here. And just like the building, I'll say close and refresh. I don't have to worry about the coordinate system because that's already set. That's a piece of metadata passed through from Civil 3D. But there is my project site here. And if I fast forward the video, I'm just importing outlines of all the other pieces there. And there you can see I've got my, my parking lot, my islands, my pavement striping, all of that just as exports from AutoCAD. Now, if we're being honest with ourselves, apart from the context, which is nice, this isn't too much better than I could render straight out of AutoCAD or Revit for that matter, or Navisworks. It doesn't really matter which one we're talking about here. So while I've really been talking about InfraWorks as an aggregation tool and kind of a similar vein to Navisworks, what I really like about InfraWorks is the fact that it's also a creation tool. So unlike Navisworks where we can only aggregate and do clash reports, InfraWorks can't really do clash, but it can do content creation here. So here, I guess this is the video that we didn't have set to autoplay. I am going to show off my landscape architecture skills and plant some trees here. And again, this is just out-of-the-box content, so it's got a pretty good selection of trees in here. So I'm just going to go ahead and plant some of those. I will fast forward here a little bit more. You don't need to see me clicking and planting all of these various trees. But again, this video is only 2.5 minutes long. I'm going to go ahead and add some cars in here. There's some people. There's some good kind of 3D content that comes along for the ride here. And with that, after importing that content, I now have a visualization like this. And this is much better, at least in my opinion, than what I could get out of Civil 3D or Revit natively. And I have invested all of about 30 minutes to get to this point, because I've been leveraging the Revit model, the Civil model directly. All I really did is just aggregate all that together and add some trees now. If I really wanted to wow my client, InfraWorks it has a shared view tool, which I think Revit now in 2019 has, and AutoCAD does too. Basically, you can share a temporary view up for 30 days. I think Revit has that now, maybe not. Anyway, InfraWorks has it though, where you can basically upload this model to the web. It's a link that will expire in 30 days. You can extend it out if you need to, but you could share that link out with your client, and they could view this right through a web browser. They don't have to have InfraWorks or anything. All they need is a web browser in order to see this. If you wanted to take this a step further, what I would do is export this from InfoWorks back into FBX and take that FBX into Navisworks. Navisworks has a really cool tool of being able to render a stereoscopic 3D rendering using the Autodesk 360 rendering. So I could do a fixed point VR basically of this site and render that and use Google Goggles, Google Goggles to here, Mr. Client, look at your site, look at my building on your site. So by the simple fact of coordinating these two models together, and apart from, I think, the benefits that this gives me in the design stage, I think it gives me a lot of client opportunities here in the way that I communicate with it, or communicate it to them as well. So I'm not sure what this video is all about. It might even be a duplicate. Anyway, so again, we really accomplished 3 basic tasks here. The first is really on, I think, the big gap in the design process today, which is simply coordinating these two models, establishing the coordinates so that the two lands can align to each other. I'm not really, I think, disrupting anything on the Revit model side because everything's still around the project base point and the internal point. Is that what you called it?
Yeah, internal origin, Revit internal origin.
So we haven't impacted that in any way. All we've done is just set that survey point, and by doing that, we've made it so we can exchange information back and forth. And I think that's really the powerful part here, that Jason can share Revit information with me, and it shows up exactly where it needs to be. I can then share information back to Jason, and it shows up exactly where it needs to be. And I think that has really great opportunities in the design side. And of course, not to mention the visualization pieces that it presents as well. So that is what we have prepared. We're certainly happy to answer any questions that you guys might have about this. Okay. To bring the land XML into Revit.
To generate the XML from Civil 3D or to both? Okay.
Okay. So both are just available in Autodesk account. So if you just go to Autodesk account or the desktop application. The first one we used was the shared reference point tool that wrote the XML file that just defined the position of the civil model. And I shared that with him. There's no plugin to export land XML, the surface data from Civil 3D. That's just baked into Civil 3D, but that's functionality that doesn't exist out of the box in Revit. To add that functionality to Revit, that's where you need the Site Designer add-in. You can also find that on the Autodesk account site for free. And that exists all the way back, I think, to 2015 or so.
There, Eagle Point owned it for a while. It's been around for a long time. I will say, in terms of the shared reference point, the shared coordinate tool, the add-in that you need to put inside of Revit. We have reports from some folks because of whatever collection or whatever suite or whatever they had. You go to manageautodesk.com, it just wasn't there. So they'd have to call the civil guy and say, log in and get me this, and usually log in, get in this. The MSI is tiny. You just install it, you're good to go. But you may need to call around to get a copy. You just can't happen to find it what you're expecting.
Yeah. They made it a lot easier to find with 2019. It was a real beast to find before 2019 came out. The Revit folks had to know to look in the Civil 3D Productivity Pack for the Revit extension because that was super intuitive. And so not many Revit folks seem to find it, but it's much easier to find now.
The building has to be moved on the site in any direction. You just go through the same process again and make a new unit, making a new site location in your project plan.
I probably use the relocate project tool, and that is supposed to move your project in relation to your survey points. And then I would generate a new DWG, but I could then export my DWG based on my survey origin at that point. And then my survey 00 should line up exactly with my survey.
Yeah, and of course, if the building footprint changed, that doesn't really matter as long as those 2 points are the same.
Like location on the site or rotation.
Right.
Then again, resetting setup and having.
I mean, you could walk through the steps again, but I think as long as I use relocate project, my survey point knows where it is. It hasn't moved. My project will move in relation to that. I will give down a new data DWG based on the survey point this time, rather than the original project origin. And then he'll pull it in and it will show those updates and moves from where they were, from the new changes that I made.
But yeah, like saying he's rotating.
Yeah, if I move it, I would need to send him,
Gotcha.
yeah. Come on, we don't change our minds. In that case, yeah, we would need to, I would need to export out that shared reference point and send that back to Jason.
I will also say though, there's nothing magical about Donnie generating that shared reference. I mean, if I have the Civil 3D file, and I have Civil 3D installed, I can just go in there, click once, click again, make an XML, and then just use it.
Which, I mean, frankly, that's the other thing with the AEC collection now. You have Civil 3D, even though I know all of you are Revit users and you don't want to dive into the nuances of Civil 3D. This is a workflow that I don't think is too terribly difficult to just kind of follow along with. You could theoretically just install Civil 3D and use it for this one function without too much fuss. Right, so
It's in the collection.
it's in the collection.
Well, but
It's not in the design suite. If you're still on a perpetual license, it's not on the,
You've only installed AutoCAD.
Right.
You need to install Civil 3D.
yeah, that's the other kind of nuance. AutoCAD 2019, you get all the vertical flavors now. You get AutoCAD Architecture MEP. Civil 3D is no longer considered AutoCAD. It's Autodesk Civil 3D as of 2019. But all the other AutoCADs are still called AutoCAD, and you get all of them now. Anyway, it's kind of weird. So we don't make the rules. We just follow along and try to educate our clients. But yeah, so if you just purchase, if a client only owns AutoCAD, while they will now actually most likely have AutoCAD Architecture and all the vertical flavors of AutoCAD, they won't have Civil 3D because it's not considered AutoCAD anymore.
the service, or is that there's 10 in there?
Yes.
Is that the same?
It is the 10, yes.
And can you do that in AutoCAD? Is that also?
So Civil 3D is the only tool that, from an Autodesk perspective, will allow me to generate a 10. What I will say is, well, we of course advocate for using Civil 3D. You will perhaps run across some civil engineers that might be using Carlson, which is kind of a competitor to Civil 3D. It sits on top of just regular AutoCAD, but it too can export land XML. So even if they're not using Civil 3D, you can still get the surface. It might be a little bit fussier to try to figure out the shared reference point because that only works in Civil 3D, but in terms of getting the precise surface definition, it doesn't really matter what they're using. You can get that through land XML.
So is the sharing of these different file types, does it work like XREF in the sense that when you change your Revit file and then you open your Civil 3D file, that building is automatically going to be changed? Or do you have to
That would be a dream.
export it?
Well, so in that regard, the way I incorporated Jason's Revit model in my Civil 3D project was through a Navisworks file. So that Navisworks file does work like an AutoCAD XREF. So if I just saved over top of it or archived it and then saved it with the same file name, it would automatically update in that regard. But it's not, there's not a dynamic link between me and Jason with that RPT.
But taking a step back, I do need to export that Navisworks file every time I make an update.
Right. Hopefully that workflow will get a little bit easier. I feel like there's some writing on the wall suggesting that it will soon, but we're not there just yet.
When you did the shared coordinates, using the XML file, you picked the base point, then you said a quasi-north. Did you just pick a surface of the building that's easy to not necessarily, it doesn't mean you say quasi-north, but it doesn't necessarily have to be anything, but it's just a surface that we can snap to.
Right. It doesn't matter what those 2 points are. We use the building corners. I might very well work with my civil. You might work with your civil to pick a building grid instead of the exterior wall, because I know that's not as precise for you guys. The big thing is just to communicate. I mean, it could be a flagpole if you happen to know the flagpole on the outside of the building. It doesn't have to even be on the building. It just has to be a relationship to the building.
Just 2 points we both can recognize.
So with your consultants, are you thinking of that part of the process, but the process of getting the shared coordinates, or are you guys still working
For the actual models, for the Revit models, it's still or but then they will acquire shared coordinates based on we're the first model to get. The idea is not to use the survey point to link my Revit file. To use my profit or my Revit origins. Survey point to let it share the information with all the other. And I will say, it's not perfect. Something's gonna break, something's gonna mess up. But in terms of the processes we had before, it's just obnoxious. You just give up. And this at least feels like some kind of light at the end of the tunnel where you can establish procedures and steps and get it down where you understand it and can make it consistent, usable across a lot of projects.
Something else I'll just kind of quickly add. This was a presentation that actually my colleague Purvi and I presented at Autodesk University last year, and we're, like I mentioned at the start here, we'll be presenting again next week. There is a handout that outlines every single one of these steps. If you just go up to the Autodesk University website and just type in a match made in coordinates, it's like a 40-page PDF that outlines every single pick and click for both Revit and Civil 3D. A match made in coordinates. I don't know if the 2018 AU is showing up publicly just yet, but last year's 2017 one will certainly show up, and the workflow really hasn't changed.
Any other questions?
How does a point cloud file work in this? Once you've established what you get back for civil, then you get a point cloud file.
I have no idea.
Well, I mean, if the point cloud file was based on survey control, at that point we could then bring that survey file in based on the survey point now, because it would know, as long as it is. So actually, I'll caveat that. As long as the survey or the point cloud is referenced to state plane coordinates or the same coordinate system, it doesn't matter what it is, just as long as it's the same coordinate system. Recognizing that Revit doesn't know truly what a coordinate system is, as long as all the source data is on the same coordinate system, we can bring that in. We should be able to bring that into Revit with no issue whatsoever. The big thing is just positioning it on Earth, which I will say that pretty much every civil engineer, unless you're working on government projects, sometimes they won't use state plane coordinates. Government might use a different coordinate system, but pretty much any private sector work that you do is 98% of the time going to be on state plane coordinates.
Hopefully that wasn't too much Civil 3D to show you at the Revit user group. Sometimes it's good to keep behind the curtain and see what the enemy is doing. And I'm sorry. But with that, thank you.
Plenty of food if you want to take leftovers home. You can have a banana pudding.
And the next meeting will be in January. We already have it.